Welcome to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity because our country suffers from IDD, integrity deficit disorder. Today we have as our guest today, Richard Villasaya, and his book, Do No Harm, a best-selling book about the immigrant children separations and about the immigrant and this country's foster care crisis. That's, just thinking about it now. I'm thinking about it, just what you put in front of me on the newspaper back east. Are you there, Richard?
I am here. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, very good. Today, Richard is our guest again, just a few weeks ago, which is in the history of 3 years worth of doing this, you're the first one to get doubled up.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, you deserve it with what you're doing and what you've recently found, and probably what you're going to put in front of me and all of my listeners in terms of, okay, I'll start it off with that. I believe what you're going to be looking at, and you already have, I was listening to the news, 5 o'clock news on TV, and this was probably maybe a week ago. And they had discovered a 2-year-old boy, and there was nobody around him, nobody anywhere. And the reason they found him was that he was crying, and there was nobody to cry to. And of course, that's the border, favorite Biden border. So we're not really adequate in terms of what do we do about a 2-year-old that run up and maybe they're going to leave him in a better world. Maybe that's a theory that they do. Do you see that kind of theory, parental theory?
Yes, I do. I mean, you mentioned the age of 2 years old. You may not know that over the last 6 years, many children have come across the border that were very young. Now, normally they don't come across by themselves. That's something that has changed. But let me take a step back. And in 2017, the U.S. government came up with a policy to separate families when they crossed into the U.S. And we're talking about generally crossing like in the deserts, not in San Diego or coming through Brownsville. The problem at that time is that our laws allowed for people to step foot in the U.S., didn't matter how they did it. And this was stated in the law, they could ask for amnesty and be accorded certain treatment as someone who asked for amnesty. And so until 2017, families came together. So if there was a child of 6 months old, they stayed with their mother, or 2 years old, or whatever age. So this wasn't really a problem until 2017. It was at that time that these children were being separated out. And I have worked cases where the youngest child on whose behalf I worked was 6 months old at the time they crossed into the U.S. and were separated from their parent. So now we've got this new situation where, because of many changes in the law and the way the border is monitored, now parents are just pushing across or handing their children over, like you said, in the hopes that they will have a better life.
Right. Now let's talk about programs in terms of, are there changes in your industry? that are going to step up or find the first step. Or you're kind of, all of us are twisting in the wind, I should say, with this matter.
To answer that, I would have to say at this particular junction, the U.S. is struggling. The U.S. foster care system is in crisis. And I wrote about this extensively in my book because it is in crisis and most people aren't aware of that. Look, during COVID, we went through this 3-year period. Many of the potential caregivers for a child passed away, grandparents. They were an amazing source for people to take in their grandchild and to care for that grandchild. Some of them would adopt their grandchild, like the grandparents who took in Simone Biles, Olympic champion. So her story is an example of kinship care where a relative stepped in, they took her out of foster care, and then they adopted her. Those people, unfortunately, because of age, mental, illness, physical or mental issues, they're not there. So that safety net of grandparents has really dropped dramatically. Then you have other adults who, because of health care issues with a spouse or someone in their family, said, I can't do it. I can't risk bringing a child who could have infection and had them impact my immediate family. So that safety net has dropped significantly. And so the foster care system, with just the children it has right now, who normally come in, which ranges about 410,000 children to 425,000 children a year. It's a lot of children. And every state right now is scrambling and begging for people to become foster parents because we have children right now who are sleeping in hotel rooms, who are sleeping on office floors, who are going to group homes that are looked at by many as a key source of abuse because there is so little monitoring of these children in these group homes, not to mention the lack of one-on-one love and care that they would get from an adult, from a parent.
Right. Well, every time I see that on TV, something like that, or in talking with friends of mine or relatives, that type of thing, none of those are foster parents. Does a person have an age classification? For instance, I'm 75 years old in 4 months. Now, am I a correct candidate to be a foster parent?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is it depends. The foster care industry in this country is not unified. It is controlled and run, for the most part, by counties. Now, in California, we have 58 counties alone. There are more than 3,000 counties in this country, all of them doing whatever they'd like because there's not a uniform national process, set of procedures. So it's pretty much the Wild West when it comes to how they operate. Some have great adoption programs. Some have little to no adoption program, or it's incredibly lengthy. Foster care programs that really support the adults, and others where people drop out because they felt like they got no support and actually got no support despite phone calls and trying to message. So to give you a good answer on that, it really depends because there could be a caseworker for a particular child who feels like, I don't know, I think John's kind of seeing the sunset of his life. So no, even though that child is sleeping on an office floor. And this is a problem because as long as you're healthy and you're able to take care of yourself financially, you should be able to take care of a child. So if I was making a decision, I'd say absolutely, because trust me, that child would love to be with an adult, someone like you, someone who would give them that one-on-one attention rather than be sleeping on the floor or in a hotel room, separated from their family, from kids, from interactions. It's it's terrible. It's almost like being in prison when you think about it. Can you imagine a 6-year-old sitting in an office having to be quiet? It just doesn't work.
Are you still there, Richard?
I am. Was there a question there? I didn't hear it, unfortunately.
Oh, no, sorry. It's I have an unstable connection, but we'll get through it. I mean, you've got such a powerful topic that I think that I'm looking up at God and saying, "Okay, God, let's get this over with," and and maybe they'll get to fix the internet. That's true. That's a true. That's going on right now. It seems to me that are there those people? I guess they are that they look for money and stipends in terms of monthly or daily or weekly. How does that work for the foster parents?
So for foster parents, for an adult who, let's use you as an example, who comes in and says, I want to be a foster parent. So once you go through the certification, the vetting process, they come into your home, they make sure that it's hopefully child-proof, ready for a child, any child. And that's something else. Could be any age child. As they do your home inspection, they check your criminal background. After you go through all of that vetting, then once they send you a child, then at that point, you do get some remuneration because, again, it's an extra body. It's, this child is eating. They need a change of clothes. They need everything else that comes along with a child's school books, whatever. And so they do pay something for that. And this is the strange part about foster care. Someone decided that if you're a relative, you don't deserve as much money as a stranger. So they pay people who don't know the child and are not related much more money than they do to relatives, even though that child still has the same costs, no matter who's caring for them. So that was a long answer to say, yes, there is a stipend. And yes, there are people who will take in 4 or 5 kids, keep the money. And there have been cases out there where these people have been brought to trial and they have been punished because they were taking all the money and not using it for the foster children and spending it either on themselves to go on trips or to take themselves and their birth kids on trips, and they left the foster kids to fend for themselves. And so just like with any situation, you can have good employees and bad employees. You can have good process and bad process. The foster care system is just like any other industry. We have people who come in for the right reasons, and unfortunately, we have people who come in for absolutely all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I can see that. And sometimes you don't get the right kind of person that would do the best type of parent for these children.
Well, this is true. And one thing we have to keep in mind, we're talking about adults. And adults do really stupid things sometimes, and they also can do very terrible, awful things.
That's awful. That was my word, awful.
Well, it's true. Because, again, we're working with people, and they're everywhere. Can't get away from them. And so it is a challenge for these agencies. They do their best. They have a vetting process. Now, having said that, some agencies do a better job of vetting than others. And the ones who do a less than wonderful job, these are the stories where someone finds out, very sadly and tragically, that child was placed with someone who was an alleged sex offender. Those are the kind of slip-ups that foster care agencies should not be making. That's a simple check of paperwork. That's not trying to look into their psyche and trying to analyze them without information. That is something where someone simply didn't follow the steps and do the proper vetting. So, but I don't want to take away from the thousands and thousands of caseworkers who are working so hard to try to do their best for foster kids, who are doing it with many more cases than they can humanly handle, which causes problems, with foster parents who sometimes get children that they're not made aware of, that this child has trauma, stress, and activities and actions that go along with that stress that some parents simply are not prepared to deal with. And there are other more serious problems that can come along with a foster child, just like anyone else. Not all of our children are angels. Some of them have serious issues, personality, challenges. And those same children, just like anywhere else, come into foster homes. And those parents, if they're not prepared for it, and there have been some that are doctors and are prepared, and they still can't handle it because it's just beyond them. So all of those people are still willing to try to do what they can to help a child.
Well, it's certainly a recruiting opportunity, but and those that do it are the ones probably most at the county. And I do recall the county that whenever I was a landlord, I had houses for sale, and then the credit crunch hit us all in 2008. And then we had renters instead of buyers. And even the people that I can't jump in and save a kid just because somehow they get off on a bad day. And that kind of thing I would think so. Let me ask you this, Richard. Is there a creative opportunity for you in looking at people that need fostership?
And we actually provide, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Through my nonprofit, Forever Homes for Foster Kids, we provide a critically important service, and it's called family finding. And family finding is a relatively simple concept. Child comes into foster care. If a relative is not immediately available to take the child, then the agency is required by state and federal law to go look for relatives. And the law is written in such a way that they are supposed to look for all adult relatives, not simply their closest aunt and uncle and grandparent. We're talking fifth cousins, that great uncle that lives up north or south or outside the country. Everywhere they're supposed to look for these relatives. Because the idea is if you look for and find enough relatives, you get this large number and notify them and say, look, little Maria or Johnny is in foster care. Would you like to take them in? Someone's going to step up and say, yes, I will. And most often, some relative will step up, has the ability, the capacity, the financials, so that they can take in another child. And they do that. That's family finding. It's so simple. Identify, make the list of relatives, locate them, notify them. And then if someone steps up, then you go through the next portion, which is called engagement. And all that is you vet them. Make sure that they are financially solid. Make sure that they don't have 10 kids already. Many agencies don't want to have too many kids in a household. And they can pass the vetting process, which sounds funny, but let's face it, we all have an Uncle Charlie in our family, that one relative that, maybe wouldn't be a great fit, to have and take in a foster child or any child.
I'm
And
lucky
that
I
also
had
could be an Aunt
never had
Sally,
those.
but still, the idea is that we do need to vet these relatives because maybe we've got someone who is less than a solid citizen. And so that's what we do. We do the family finding. And this is really important here. We do it when a child comes into foster care and they have a relative that's living in Latin America. Now, that could mean 10 minutes from San Diego, living in Tijuana. 10 minutes. Doesn't mean that they're living 1,000 miles down in Central America. And does this mean that the child is not a U.S. citizen? No. It just simply means, like me, I've got all kinds of relatives living in Mexico. I'm a U.S. citizen. My family is seventh generation Texans. We've been around a while, but I still have relatives living in Mexico, and I have relatives living in Europe. So if I was a younger child and I was put into foster care, where might they look? They might look in Mexico or in Europe if I didn't have any other relatives who either stepped up or couldn't be found. And that happens. So we fulfill that function, and it is a really important function because it gets kids out of the system, out of sleeping on the floor in offices, out of group homes where they might be abused. 1 out of every 3 children in foster care get abused either physically or sexually. So we want to get them out of that environment. It's not a long-term solution. Get them out of there and back to family. And that's what we do. And we do it very well.
Well, I know that you certainly put your hand over your heart when you do what you do. And I'm going to say it's a shame there's not others, but there always are going to be others, I guess, to some extent.
One of the biggest challenges in foster care right now is that this tool, this process, is not being utilized across the country. There are agencies right now that do a token effort. And so when they go in front of the judge and the judge says, "Did you try to find family members?" "Well, we called, Your Honor, but we only got voicemail, and that's all we could do." That's not an effort, but they'll get away with it. Yeah. Or the judge will simply take it on faith that if they say, "We did our best," we don't know how bad their best was. And for some of these agencies, they don't have a formal family finding program. And just to point this out, the government right now sends out millions of dollars every year. And one of the activities that are covered with those millions of dollars is family finding. And in California, 5 years ago, when they were flush with money, they gave out millions of dollars to the counties in California. And one of the only four activities they could use the money on was specifically family finding was one of the key activities. So it's not like it's this fringe idea that no one's ever heard about, that has not been around for 30 years. The problem is no one's doing it, and they're not doing it well. Now, when I say no one, that's an absolute. So that's not true. There are some agencies who are doing it. Mm-hmm. Some are doing it well. Some are doing it extremely poorly. And many of these agencies, though, if little Maria or Marco has relatives in Mexico or somewhere in Latin America, they're not trying. They're not even looking. And if they're looking, they're not looking for all relatives. They may look for one. And I say this from experience because I have had someone tell me that they had decided not to look for a child's father. Okay. And we were offering our services free, and they still said no.
Really? I saw a picture in the newspaper today, and that's not odd. I read through 3 newspapers every day, and one of them was a picture of Bill Gates. And the picture of Bill Gates was that his net worth was going to increase by 1.3 billion more based upon the earnings that are about to be released. And I thought, what about Bill Gates having a lot of ideas of his own and have looked at ideas like yours and what how do you take the path to someone like that and then you get an opportunity, you'd convince beyond Richard.
Well, it would be
possible?
wonderful if I had a direct line to Bill Gates. They do wonderful work through their charity, their foundation. It's very true. Each state needs to increase their budget to be able to improve their training, bring in more staff, have accountability to absorb all the children that are coming in so that these children are treated properly and with respect, and that people are looking for their best outcome. The interesting thing about family finding is that it works for anybody. If you're a conservative individual and you want your government not to spend a lot, you should be fighting for family finding, because if I find a child's relatives and they get out 6 months earlier than they would have or could have, that's thousands of dollars in savings. And if we leave them in until they're 18 years old and then they are forced out into the street alone, those children, there was a report on this by the son of Ronald Reagan, Michael Reagan, who said those children will cost society $300,000 in services. And family finding could just eliminate all of that. We find relatives, and then we could get children back to family. That's on that side. And then for those who feel that we should do this because children are our future, again, you get them out of a system that's not created to care for children and to foster their imagination and their creativity, and you get them back into a family environment where those things can happen. So no matter what you're looking at, tighter budget, less government, better outcomes for children, family finding does it. Here's the shocker. There's not one college in this country who has a degree in social work, whether it's a bachelor's or master's, that teaches family finding. Not one. And so people are coming out with these degrees and going into social work and have no idea how to do this. And we're relying on agencies who don't have enough funding, don't have enough staff, don't do training to somehow train these people to be experts. Oh, and then we want you to be experts at doing this internationally.
Right.
And you can imagine how well that works.
No bueno.
No bueno is right, because if it doesn't work for your local mom and pop, it's not going to work for the county. It's not like they have a magic sauce, magic formula that makes them so much better. They're just people in a position who don't have the training and don't have the resources.
Right.
And if I could, you mentioned about the child that came across the border at the beginning of our talk here.
Mm-hmm.
They just found out, a very important article just came out in the New York Times, April 11th, sharing that they had uncovered that more than 1,000 children that were U.S. citizens who were coming across the border, Mexico-U.S. border, with a parent who was still an immigrant, who didn't have their green card, weren't U.S. citizens. They were separated during that 2017 time slot to 2021. They got separated just like the immigrant children, except the U.S. children went into foster care. So they're coming from Mexico, or they're coming through the Mexico-U.S. border. Chances are their heritage is Latino, which means they understand Spanish, more than likely. So now that U.S.-born child, solid citizen, because probably the other spouse was a U.S. citizen. That's the only way you can get this to work. is having one spouse that's a U.S. citizen and their child is automatically granted citizenship. That child's now in foster care. I mentioned the 3,000 county agencies. That means these children are anywhere. It's like opening up a pillow, letting all the feathers blow in the wind. They have no idea right now where these kids are. And they have to figure out who they are. And then they got to get the information to find their relatives who are not in the U.S., who got deported back to wherever their country of origin is. And this is a huge problem. In addition to everything else that we've been hearing about, these children, who knows? More likely, some of those children will never, ever be reunited with their parent again because there's no one to know or to ask the right questions because of training, lack of cultural sensitivity, lack of knowing family, finding and connecting the dots. That's a huge problem.
Richard Villasana, tell us about your book and where you can find it for people to buy.
Well, my book is, and I'll just hold it here, it is Do No Harm. It is on Amazon. It is also in Barnes & Noble, local bookshops. It is about those children that got separated, more than 5,000 children that got separated from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border in 2017 through 2021. It also talks heavily for anyone who wants to understand the foster care system and the problems it has right now. The second half of the book covers it. Talks about homelessness, sex trafficking, what happens when a child ages out. And I will say this, it gives solutions because as much as we've talked about a lot of bad things here, there are solutions. Family finding is one of them.
Right.
And there are agencies out there that are doing it. We need more people doing it. And we need people in the public to say, I will educate myself. I will learn about this. I care about children. So if someone cares about a child, has been involved in foster care, they need to get this book, get caught up, get current, and see the solutions that they can do personally, whether it's spending 5 minutes or 5 hours or donating or like Bill Gates calling me up and give me a boatload of money. We can solve these problems. I do it every week. We make real life changes for children by getting them back to their families. This is not smoke and mirrors. These are real outcomes that impact these children and make a huge difference in their life by changing it and getting them back to family where they should be.
Right. Well, Richard, it's been a pleasure listening to you over a topic that's humongous, I guess I should say. But it takes a guy like you to be able to do that.
Well, thank you very much. And this is a first. I want you to know right here, John, I'm in contact with domestic and international media, and you beat them all. This is the first presentation of anyone hearing about this new information from me right here.
That's great. That's terrific. I always tell my listeners that tune in, and I bet they're getting their money's worth. I would. And, you know, it's good for you, good for me. I'm glad that you help me out with the internet. We'll see how it lasts. I think we did. With the internet, of course. Let's see. I want to thank my listeners, of course, that they come back and listen to all kinds of topics. But the book thing is probably the most, I think, is important. I want to say adios and thank you, Richard. So long and happy trails to all.